Welcome everyone. My name's Simon Turner and I'm a campaign manager for Driving for Better Business. Following the recent launch of our COVID-19 transport toolkit, we recognise the need to look at some of these issues in much greater detail. And the first of these key issues, which we're going to look on this video, is the maintenance and management of vehicles. Joining me on this discussion today are Peter Golding, the founder and managing director of FleetCheck, Steve Bridge, the Managing Director of Mercedes-Benz Vans UK,
Hello.
And Mark Cartwright, who is Head of Commercial Vehicle Incident Prevention for Highways England.
Hi.
Among the challenges we'll be discussing are the roadworthiness of essential vehicles, vehicle sanitisation, management and record keeping, and back to normal. So let's start with roadworthiness of essential vehicles. So we know that MOTs have been suspended and that many garages are shut. Steve, how would you suggest fleets that are still operational in the current circumstances ensure their vehicles stay roadworthy?
Simon, first of all, thank you for the invite. I think when we looked at essential vehicles, we were in a fortuitous position as a brand because we supply quite a number of what would deem to be essential fleets. People like ambulance services, we supply 11 out of 13. The e-grocery market, we had a huge percentage share of that. So we had to do something quite quickly, and that was to encourage our retailer partners to remain open and to provide what would in essence be an essential service to the essential service providers. So uptime was key, managing defects, parts supply, all of those things that were all of a sudden polarized into an opinion, which maybe in a normal day-to-day would happen, but everything seemed to become polarized all at once. But from our point of view, it was all about continual service. 97% of our dealer network remained open with the relevant measures, of course, around that, and that's how we addressed it.
Yeah, you mentioned parts in there. Are you able to get parts and to maintain the vehicles?
Yeah, surprisingly, I mean, we have a European logistics centre in Milton Keynes, and that, of course, is fed by a number of different European logistics centres in Germany, Spain, Italy, France. And of course, a lot of those countries were affected in a different way to us at a different time. So whilst we maintained a parts supply level, it was probably more about VOR parts than stock parts. So we prioritized our VOR ahead of routine stock replenishment to the dealers. But I was pleased to say that in the operation in Milton Keynes, we had the same challenges as everyone else, really, which was essential worker status. We had to ensure that they were looked after as individuals and as employees. But to answer your question, yeah, it was okay, or still is okay.
So I mean, again, Steve, thank you, because obviously we recognise what an essential job the ambulance is and what Mercedes are doing in supplying those vehicles. But I know, Mark, from conversations we've been having and the underlying concerns about the duty of care of having vehicles on the road, perhaps who don't have access to a network of repair stations. And I know there is genuine concern at the moment these vehicles may not be roadworthy.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And again, thanks for getting us involved in this podcast. The point that we've been trying to make is, yes, we know there are all kinds of relaxations around MOTs, drivers' hours, etc., but it doesn't take away the legal and indeed the moral obligation of operators, drivers to abide by the legislation. There's still a requirement for vehicles to be roadworthy at all times. That hasn't gone away.
And Steve, I know you can only answer for Mercedes, but I know it's a question all of our clients have asked about if vehicles can't go in for routine maintenance and they're on, obviously, as many of them are, extended warranties. I mean, could you maybe give some guidance as to what they should think about? Because I know this is a concern on that side.
Yeah, as you rightly say, I can only answer on behalf of the brand that I'm responsible for. And for me, it was essential to retain as much normality as possible. So we haven't experienced any interruption to that service really.
Okay.
So the question is relevant, of course, but I haven't got a position to sort of say that it deviates from previous. Everything remains as is. Business as usual as best possible.
So if we're looking at the duty of care issues, Mark, that you've raised and the concerns there, if drivers, I mean, it is clear instructions to drivers as well, isn't it? To make sure that if the vehicles are on the road, it's down to the drivers to make sure that the vehicles are roadworthy.
Absolutely. I think what people absolutely need to have front and centre in the mind with this is there's been no change for legislation. There's a few decisions around, you know, relaxation of drivers' hours rules, as you know, obviously the MOT situation, but that doesn't change any of the legal requirements for that vehicle to be operated in a safe, legal and roadworthy manner. Drivers to be well rested and to be abiding by the legislation. Absolutely none of that has changed.
What's Highways England's sort of concerns about that then? Because I imagine, you know, poorly maintained vehicles and, you know, fatigued drivers, that potentially can cause a lot of disruption on the strategic road network.
Absolutely, and I mean, what you've got to bear in mind, we'll always talk about our two prime imperatives in Highways England. One is the safety and the well-being of what we call our customers, i.e. road users of all, you know, regardless of why they're using the road. And our second one is the reliability of the network. And if you come at it from a roadworthiness and a fitness to drive piece, clearly any reduction in the roadworthiness of vehicles, in the ability of drivers, impacts on that number one imperative. And, you know, thankfully with the traffic volumes being down as they are, the number of incidents have reduced significantly, pretty much in line with that reduction. But there's still bad stuff going on out there, absolutely. And if you look at the second imperative in terms of network reliability, even, you know, non-serious crashes from the point of view of fatalities and injuries, they still disrupt the network significantly. And this is at the time where, frankly, with the amount of emphasis on frontline support of the population, you really don't want disruption on the primary network in the UK.
Yeah. What's, you know, if any of that disruption is caused by breakdowns, presumably the breakdown recovery services aren't at full strength either, because, you know, they'll be depleted through, you know, staff being off ill, and, you know, with the reduction, of maintenance outlets, then, you know, are there places to have your vehicle recovered too?
Absolutely, it's a good point, Simon, because if you none of the support mechanisms for the network are exempt the absenteeism and the illness, etc. that's going on. And, you know, our own teams are depleted at the moment, as is everybody else. We know the same goes with the police and other frontline people, and absolutely that's the same with recovery agencies. And I think what people do need to bear in mind is, of course, with recovery, if the driver, if the business involved aren't able to arrange their own recovery within a reasonable, sensible time period, then Highways England will arrange for the vehicle to be recovered at their cost.
And as you say, Mark, you know, that network needs to be maintained. I know perhaps you won't be able to comment as far as Highways England's concerned, but there's been quite a lot of notifications from the police about people's driving styles, an increase in speeding because the roads themselves, there's less traffic on them. I mean, obviously the guidance to companies is to give instructions to their drivers on what they should be doing and adhering not only to have a roadworthy vehicle, but to drive within the law. I would imagine you'd reinforce that.
Absolutely, and you guys know as well as I do, it's not just about the road traffic legislation, it's about organisations' duty of care under health and safety legislation extends as well. And certainly across the network, anecdotal reports we've seen, we know that there's been some fairly extreme levels of speeding. It would appear most of, if not all of that, is from private motorists. And, you know, rest assured, the enforcement agencies are on it. And, you know, they might not be chasing people down on the road, but they've got the details from the various cameras, etc., etc. And I think some of those drivers, you know, could well be expecting a knock on the door at some stage. In terms of general speed on the network, you're seeing exactly what you'd expect to see. I guess there's a shift in the mix of traffic on there. Overall flows are probably somewhere in the region of 70-odd, 72%, something like that, down on weekdays, but because of that, most of the traffic that isn't there is non-commercial. So the mix is now around about 50-50 on the network between commercial vehicle traffic and non-commercial, where it was at 70-30 previously. And our network systems are showing general increases in overall speed. And certainly we've had some support from some of the telematics organisations from their data, and it's showing that average speeds are up, as you would expect, because vehicles aren't getting stuck in congestion in the same way. And equally, and it's important to say out there are reports of excessive speeding. Actually, the great majority of commercial vehicle drivers that we see are actually abiding by the legislation and abiding by speed limits.
I think that's an important point, and we will cover that again a little later on. But I think the takeaway from that is that fleet operators need to make sure that their drivers are aware that they're still required to drive within the law. So let's now take a look at one of the subjects that's been subject to a lot of comment over the last couple of weeks. I know we've had a lot of queries about it, and that's vehicle sanitisation. So the scientists are saying that the virus can live on hard surfaces for quite some time, and it seems that plastic is the worst. Apparently it can live for up to 72 hours on that. That presents a number of challenges for vehicle logistics, with vehicles being delivered or collected, vehicles being used across multiple shifts or with multiple occupants. And Steve, I imagine some of those challenges are having to be dealt with on a daily basis by your workshops where vehicles are coming in. How are you looking at those issues where, to protect staff and technicians and customers with that vehicle handover?
So I guess the key point is protecting the people. And in most vehicles, there are lots and lots of surfaces, door cards, steering wheels, door handles, etc., etc., etc. So most technicians these days tend to wear gloves. Most technicians these days will focus on the cleanliness of the vehicle upon handover back to the client, but probably not on receipt of the vehicle. So I think from our point of view, we had to introduce some sanitisation measures that we'd never done in the past. Good hygiene, you could call it, as it goes in a business. And I think some of the temporary disruption that we might experience, if you call it that, will become permanent behaviour moving forward. Because, look, this is a virus that's been around for a while, and given the fact that there are other viruses that live on surfaces as well, it's pretty good practice to introduce sanitisation. So whilst it might have appeared to be a pain in the in the operation, it probably is good practice to do anyway.
Mark, a point that was raised, we were talking to a rental company who obviously have not only the challenge of making sure, as you said, Steve, that the vehicles themselves are properly cleaned, and as you say, that's good policy anyway, where people have looked at trying to create perspex screens or a way of separating, which we appreciate potentially could be a can of worms as far as type approval is concerned. But just be interested from your side, Mark, on what your thoughts are, where you're hearing about requests for modifications or people perhaps doing it. I mean, what would your views be on that?
We've heard a few of these, to be honest. Again, it kind of echoes the point I was making earlier, that to all intents and purposes, from a legislative point of view, nothing's actually changed. Our understanding is if it's a part of the build of a vehicle prior to that vehicle's registration, frankly, it's no different to any other modification of a vehicle racking or, for example, and just forms part of the type approval process, either as a whole vehicle process or indeed an individual assessment. I mean, clearly there's a bit of a challenge with that, in so much as DVSA have the same resource issues that most people find. Actually getting through that process is fraught with challenges as well. If it's post-registration, and again, frankly, it's no different than any other post-registration modification of a vehicle to wheels, suspension, bodywork, etc., in so much as long as it stays roadworthy from a legal point of view, there's no particular issues with it. But of course, the insurers will have an interest in it, and as I guess the challenge would be if the insurers object to it post-incident, which would leave a few people with a few issues. So my advice would be, if it's post-registration, just check in with your insurers and get their views on it.
Fantastic. Steve, you mentioned at the end of your piece where you're talking about sanitisation procedures and policies in the workshops. Do you think this is going to become a sort of standard part of everyday life going forward? Companies are going to have to rethink some of their policies, health and safety policies, or driving at work policies, to include sanitisation and cleansing of vehicles and stuff as a routine part of life going forward?
In a word, yes. I think it's good practice to focus on hygiene in that way. I mean, just picking up on the question of perspex, I mean, if for example this stuff lives on hard plastics, it doesn't make any sense to me to be putting more hard plastic in the vehicle. It probably makes better sense for individuals to have more of an awareness about, if they sneeze or cough, do it in a fashion where, you know, it's a more hygienic way. So I think the knock-on effect will be for quite a while, really, in terms of social distancing and sanitisation, as people's awareness and fear type of thing carries on. I was asked a question by someone the other day. They said, they asked me, would I be happy to fly to somewhere at the end of June? And I said, well, yeah, of course, why would I not? And they said, yeah, but would it not be like, you know, a bit unsafe? Well, it's unsafe to drive my car statistically, isn't it? But I still do that. So it's about awareness, and it's about just habit forming. So yeah, I think there will be some legacies and some permanent behaviour that changes in the dealer.
Yeah, I'd absolutely.
Talking about policy then takes us on to the whole management issue, I guess. So let's look at that next. So the need to adhere to established policies is more important now than ever. And I guess, Mark, you ran the Van Excellence programme for the FTA for many years, and probably more aware than most of the need to have robust policies that are followed. What's your view on that?
Absolutely. And it's really changed from pre-pandemic, really, to be perfectly honest. I mean, the procedures and processes are expected to very much laid down by the traffic commissioners and a part of the operator licence process. Nothing has really changed there. When you start getting into vehicles that are driven for work, and I would include cars in this as well, clearly our advice to people is to establish the right kind of operational procedures and processes to ensure that your vehicles are roadworthy and that your drivers are fit and qualified to drive the vehicle that you've asked them to drive. What I would say, having said that, where the business hasn't got processes in place, is a damn good time to start getting them in place to give them that confidence and assurance that they're doing the right kind of things post pandemic, because clearly you'll have vehicles potentially that have been mothballed for a while, or have either been working at capacity for a period of time, depending on which side of the fence our organisation is, and similarly with the drivers. And getting those processes in place, as we know from our time with Van Excellence, and indeed with Driving for Better Business, Simon, pays the operator back in dividends. What I would say for those organisations that do have those kind of processes and procedures in place, this is absolutely not the time to be taking their foot off the gas in terms of the application and the robustness of those processes. Certainly, if I was in a fleet management position, when my guys came back into work, I'd be all over the pre-use checks, the vehicle condition, and equally any form of feedback I can get on driver behaviour, whether it be a telematic systems or not, I'd be all over it, because actually you want to be making sure the drivers and the vehicles are coming back and being operated to their optimal compliance at these kind of stages. It isn't the time to be taking any kind of shortcuts.
Yeah, well, on that point, I got asked the other day whether it would be a good idea to suspend licence checking, for instance, of drivers who were furloughed. But I think, drivers who've been furloughed over the course of the year, they're not being furloughed for that long overall, and it's not a vast expense. You know, if it really is the difference between the financial security of your business, you'd have to think very hard, because whatever you try and undo at the moment to try and save a few pennies, your systems have got to be robust enough that it gets picked up immediately everybody returns to work. And I think, you know, I would certainly, if I was in that position, would be very thoughtful about whether that was the case. I wouldn't want people coming back, especially in light of what we've heard of it, you know, the excessive speeding that's going on. You can't afford to be.
Simon, I think you can make across a piece of any maintenance or compliance issue is, why would you scrimp on something that is so important when you come back to a degree of normality? I'm not underestimating the financial stress that businesses find themselves under, but saving, you know, a relatively small amount of money to do that, you know, if they genuinely need to do that, we're not in a position to argue against it. When they come back, the requirements are still there, and you can imagine a larger fleet with a good number of drivers, and indeed you can say the same for vehicle condition, coming back and trying to catch back up with that after, you know, potentially a 3-4 month layoff. Really difficult, and you know, who knows what's happened to that driver's license status during that period.
I mean, I know, Steve, it's something we spoke about this is one of the challenges, obviously, having access to robust database, and obviously being able to, if we're talking about the maintenance regimes, obviously license checking, as you said, Simon, is imperative. And if people do want to, I mean, we've already got obligations with MOTs, but what was your thoughts, Steve, about how they should manage their fleet?
It's quite simple in my world, really, and that is that a well-maintained vehicle is far better in operation than a non-well-maintained vehicle. So, you know, the age-old adage of preventative maintenance is there for all to see. So, just picking up on Mark's point, you know, it's sometimes a little bit penny wise, pound foolish in the operation, and then the professional operators know that. So for us as a brand, we're all about moving into now a holistic transportation and mobility solution, where we actually help people understand that if they do just that, if they do preventative maintenance, it will give them much more uptime than downtime. And downtime is very expensive. Uptime is not expensive, but preventative maintenance you have to introduce into your regime in order to give you good uptime, because it's a mechanical piece of equipment at the end of the day. It's like if you buy a very expensive watch, if you don't have it serviced, it'll lose time. Simple as that, really.
Yeah, that's good.
I think one of the things that we noticed from some of the fleets is obviously some of those fleet management departments, if you like, or, you know, even if it's only one person doing it as a part role, if your staff are depleted due to illness in the current situation, it's very difficult for them to maintain that effort and, you know, comprehensive management of the fleet, both vehicles and drivers, isn't it?
It is, and without naming any names, we manage a couple of big high street names with 3,000 and 4,000 vehicles, and you know, my responsibility is to deliver them indirectly, you know, an uptime level of 97% and above. And the way I do that is a number of different techniques, but it all really revolves around a people and process thing that is a robust fleet management package. And I don't think every operator these days can afford to have the right number of people to manage their fleets properly. That's really why fleet management companies exist. And, you know, it's the way forward. I really do believe that. If you're a heavy goods vehicle operator with a CPC holder and an O license, you've maybe then got, you know, the right structure. But in the van world, it's probably a little bit more difficult, because you might have started off with one van as an operator, grown, and you might find yourself with 12 or 15 vans. The legislation is the same, whether you've 12 or 15 or whether you've 5 or 6,000. And the concept is the same.
I know it's an area. Sorry, go on, Mark, please.
I just thought I'd throw this in at this stage. It's something we became aware of yesterday with not one only organisation, obviously, but fairly frontline essential business, all hands to the pump, including, you know, a fair number of our administrative people getting involved with the distribution process, and they renewed their operator license slipped through it. And they found themselves very quickly, found out day before yesterday, with a revoked operator's license in a part of the country, because it's an organisation that's actually supplying essential services into the Nightingale Hospital. So it is broader than just the vehicle and the driver piece. You do need to making sure that from an admin point of view, you know, the bills that need to be paid are being paid.
I think, and that's a really valid point, Mark. And I think one of the concerns that we see, we did a recent poll with Fleet News on people's preparation and anticipation of being able to be ready for this, the crisis and operating with it. Obviously, clearly, the majority of companies were ill prepared for this because nobody really saw it coming. One of the concerns that we see, you talked about the heavy goods market, but the light commercial vehicle operators, often the people in the role to look after that, not only will be ill prepared for this situation, but may not necessarily have the training and guidance and tools to look after the vehicles. Now, whether it be Mark or Steve pick up on that, but it's certainly an area of concern we're seeing with the van world, where there isn't that level of training. Welcome a response on that.
Mark, you probably, in your Van Excellence former world, a little bit, you know, ahead of the game with this question.
I think it's a massively valid observation, to be honest, is with due respect to a lot of those organisations in the kind of SME, micro SME sector, if you want to call it that, and the level of transport logistics expertise within that organisation is maybe not as what it is in a larger truck operating business. And, you know, one of the things that I would say, and we've seen some fantastic examples of this over the last few weeks, is that an awful lot of people very willing to give of their expertise and their support freely and willingly. So my point to those kind of businesses is don't be afraid to raise your hand and ask for support from, you know, people like us around the room, but also their fellow operators, people within their supply chains, local organisations, because again, my experience has been there's a lot of people very willing to give of their knowledge and experience freely in these strange times.
Yeah, and I'd add to that and say, you know, if you're one of those fleet operators and you're unsure where to turn at the moment, you know, contact us through the Driving for Better Business website, and we'll try and put you in touch with someone who might be able to help you.
Absolutely.
So I think on that, let's wrap that one up, and let's look at what we're all looking forward to, and that's hopefully getting back to normal sometime soon. Right, so I think in returning to normal, the first thing we need to recognise is that probably normal isn't going to be normal as we recognise it, and there's going to be a number of challenges that we have to deal with as the lockdown restrictions are eased and we all start to return to normal operational levels. The first one is going to be, you know, reinstating mothballed vehicles onto the road. We've covered quite a bit of that in the previous video. And we've got a resource we're developing in collaboration with Mercedes-Benz that we're going to announce the release of very shortly. So I think the two key issues I'd like to cover here are, you know, how we deal with the backlog in maintenance and servicing and MOTs, and also reinstating drivers, because there's going to be some significant challenges there. I think, you know, Peter, to sort of throw that one to you first, I guess we've been discussing the backlog of MOTs and servicing. Where do you think the main challenges are going to lie?
Well, I know this is an area, and I appreciate obviously have Steve here from Mercedes. The concerns with the widespread closure of a number of garages, then there's clearly a lot of vehicles that you know, won't have had their routine maintenance, and we know there is that extension of 6 months on the MOTs. So I think one of the underlying concerns, it's going to be very frustrating if you're at a point where you want to return to work but you can't get your vehicles booked in. I mean, Steve, it'd be a good question perhaps for you, as far as the pent-up demand's concerned, as and when things start coming through properly, what would your recommendation be to companies as far as vehicles in for repair and trying to reduce the vehicle off the road time?
I think the recommendation I would give is just to plan ahead as much as possible. So, as you mentioned, and I mentioned previously, I mean, we're still open as an example. So we're talking to all of our operators, excuse me, we're saying to them, the fact that there is an extension to MOT is just there to help. It shouldn't be used as a default position to just ignore normal behaviour. So we're trying to keep as much business as usual as possible. The advice I would give is just to plan and don't let it creep up on you, because it could well be that on the return to work, as you describe, 6 or 10 or 12 or 20 vehicles are all out of MOT. And yet, if you'd have planned that a little bit better, they could have not been out of MOT, even though they were not in use. They could have been done prior. So this is a big topic and one that requires a lot of work around it. But the key to it is just to plan and not to ignore it.
Absolutely. Something to add into that is when the degree of normality comes back, you the only business to be back on the road and catch up with MOTs and even service, to be honest. So you're going to be working in a potentially in a situation with restricted availability as well.
That's a point, and I think one of the points that you've raised with myself a while ago, Mark, is about some of this ancillary equipment that's fitted to vehicles, and I think perhaps could be overlooked to do with the loader inspections and things like that.
Absolutely. I mean, there are very few vans out there which are just native vehicles anymore. So many of them have got various racking, electrical modifications, welfare units, mutes, cranes, tail lifts, God alone knows what else, and they've all got maintenance requirements. Some of them have got statutory certification requirements to them as well, so they need to be taken into account as well as the vehicle itself.
But it's not just the vehicles, is it? Because we touched on this in one of the previous videos about reinstating drivers, because none of us are going to be used to the traffic levels that were there before the lockdown. So we've got, I think one of the key things I think is going to be a challenge is reinstating furloughed van drivers who've got used to sitting at home, maybe the occasional trip to the shop in their private car. So all of a sudden you're sticking them back in a commercial vehicle with size and visibility restrictions that they're just not used to. So we've got to have give them some time to readjust and make them aware of those and try and support them in making that readjustment as quickly as possible.
I think so, and I mean, our kind of characterisation of this is that a fleets who are absolutely running at or beyond capacity, basically on the stand down, and both of those fleets have challenges from a driver reinstating point of view. And you know what it's like when you come back off a fortnight's holiday and get in your car for the first time for a fortnight. You've forgotten how to drive the damn thing. So equally, there will be refamiliarisation issues with drivers. They've maybe got used to driving in a different way with reduced traffic volumes where they have been out. Anecdotally, the press is full of stories of us as a nation perhaps drinking a little bit more than we had previously. So there are issues that come in there. And, you can see the government talking already about mental health and well-being. You've got as an operator, you really do need to be on top of your drivers' mental and physical abilities when they came back. And I am sure there will be drivers coming back in a very different mental state than they left a few months ago, and maybe there's been instances in their own family, in their close circle, where the virus has hit them. So as an operator, of course it's obvious that you want to be on top of the vehicle's condition before you let it back out on the network, but I think equally you want to be on top of the driver condition as well.
I mean, we also raised the point of sort of pedestrian behaviour and people sort of crossing the road without looking because they expect there to be no traffic there. So, the drivers are going to have a lot to contend with when they come back. Have you got any suggestions for how fleets should look at making sure their drivers are well prepared for this, because obviously the risk is the potential for accidents and potentially third-party injuries as well, which is something we all want to try and avoid.
There's the obvious comment we made earlier about technology, and of course that plays a part in it, but equally, talk to them. One of the challenges with van fleets is very often the drivers are a very dispersed fleet. We've spoken about this previously, where the driver comes out of their house, gets in their vehicle, does their job of work, and goes back into it. It's any real direct contact with them. This really should be an opportunity for the businesses to perhaps, maybe overstating, but reboot that kind of relationship. Absolutely, just ensuring their drivers' well-being before asking to get involved with the job. And that for me would seem to be a very straightforward process, is engaging with various managerial and supervisory chains within an organisation, and just making sure it is as well as it can be before they press go.
Fantastic. Okay, I think that concludes it for this video. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your insights, and hope you found the video useful. See you on the next one.
Fantastic. Thanks, Simon.
I mentioned a new resource we're working on in collaboration with Mercedes-Benz to support you in reinstating mothballed vehicles. This is going to cover helping you with driver awareness of policy, making sure the vehicles are put back on the road legally, and giving drivers the tools to make those important back-to-work vehicle checks. You can sign up for the updates on both the Driving for Better Business and FleetCheck websites, and we'll let you know when it's released, as well as further videos in this series as we release them. I hope you found the video useful, and thank you for watching.